Cartoons are remembered as bright, innocent escapes. But hidden beneath the laughter are characters so controversial they were erased from history. Some were offensive, others unsettling, and some simply too dangerous for networks to risk. What happens when beloved creations vanish without explanation? Tonight we uncover 15 forgotten cartoon characters that got banned and the uncomfortable stories behind their disappearance. Sunflower, Fantasia, 1940. When Disney released Fantasia in 1940, critics called it a bold symphony of art and sound. But nestled inside its lush pastoral symphony sequence was Sunflower, a character Disney now pretends never existed. She was a small black centaurette, drawn with exaggerated minstrel features, oversized lips, a wide grin, and a subservient posture. Her role wasn't magical or heroic, it was humiliating. Sunflower polished the hooves and brushed the hair of the elegant, fair-skinned centaurs, embodying the most degrading stereotypes of her time. To audiences in 1940, this didn't raise eyebrows. Hollywood was awash in casual caricature, and animation leaned heavily on racist shorthand. But by the 1960s, during civil rights protests and changing social values, Disney made a decision. Sunflower had to go. In re-releases of Fantasia, her entire character was cut. By the VHS and DVD eras, she had been erased so completely that many fans grew up never knowing she existed. Yet early animation cells, production sketches, and rare prints reveal the uncomfortable truth. Sunflower wasn't an accident, she was drawn deliberately, normalized, and shipped to theaters worldwide. The attempt to erase her says as much about the studio's embarrassment as it does about the cultural shift that forced her removal. The tragedy isn't just Sunflower's existence, but her disappearance. By hiding her, Disney avoided confronting its past, leaving audiences with a clean history instead of an honest one. Today, Sunflower lives on only in whispered fan debates and leaked images, an awkward ghost in Disney's vault, a reminder of the prejudices animation once played for laughs. Her story forces us to ask, is erasure a solution, or does it bury the lesson we most need to remember? Mammy Two Shoes, Tom and Jerry, 1940s to 50s. In Tom and Jerry, chaos reigns. Broken dishes, smashed furniture, wild chases. But hovering just outside the frame was another constant presence. Mammy Two Shoes, the housemaid who scolded Tom for his endless messes. For many viewers in the 1940s and 1950s, her voice and slipper-slapping hands were as iconic as the cat-and-mouse duo themselves. Yet today, she is almost entirely forgotten, her image erased from syndication. Mammy Two Shoes was drawn with the stereotypical features of a black mammy figure, a relic of minstrel shows. Her thick dialect and one-dimensional role as a house servant made her one of the most glaring racial caricatures in mainstream animation. To early audiences, she was simply comic relief. To later generations, she was deeply offensive. By the 1960s, TV broadcasts began cutting her appearances. By the 1980s and 1990s, she had either been redubbed with a neutral, proper English voice or replaced entirely with a white character in reruns. This decision created strange fractures in the series' history. Some grew up with Mammy as a familiar part of the cartoon's rhythm, while others never saw her at all. And unlike Tom or Jerry, who remain timeless, Mammy became controversial evidence of how animation once relied on lazy stereotypes. Her removal raises a contradiction. On one hand, she was undeniably a hurtful caricature. On the other, she was one of the very few recurring female figures in the Tom and Jerry universe. Her absence leaves the series oddly hollow, a revision of history that hides how entertainment once marginalized women of color into narrow, stereotyped roles. Today, Mammy Two Shoes exists only in uncut archival prints, fan forums, and rare DVD editions. She has become a ghost of animation history, at once a symbol of what should never return and a reminder of how deeply woven racism was into the fabric of even our most beloved childhood classics. The Crows, Dumbo, 1941. Dumbo is remembered as a tearjerker, a baby elephant mocked for his oversized ears, only to triumph by flying. But one of its most controversial groups of characters has nearly vanished from modern view: the crows who teach Dumbo to soar. On the surface, the crows are comic relief, their jazzy voices and playful antics offering levity. But beneath the humor lies a troubling truth. Their leader was literally named Jim Crow, a cruel reference to segregation laws. The characters were voiced by white actors imitating black dialects, embodying stereotypes of African American culture while playing to minstrel show traditions. What makes them complicated is that, in the story, the crows are the only ones who show Dumbo kindness. They're the ones who encourage him when others mock him. Some defenders argue this makes them progressive, symbols of outsider solidarity. Yet the way they were animated, their exaggerated movements, and their dialect make it impossible to ignore their roots in racist caricature. For decades, Disney sidestepped the issue. The crows remained in theatrical re-releases and VHS editions. But as cultural conversations about race grew louder, critics increasingly pointed to the crows as examples of harmful representation. When Disney Plus launched in 2019, Dumbo was included, but with a warning about outdated cultural depictions. For children's television broadcasts, the crows were often cut entirely. This editing created a strange tension. Do we erase characters that offend or keep them as historical context? The crows now float in limbo, too infamous to ignore, too embarrassing to show in full. For older audiences, they remain a nostalgic memory of the film. For younger ones, they barely exist at all. Their banning leaves behind a haunting question. In trying to protect viewers, do we sanitize history until it disappears? Or should these characters remain visible as reminders of how prejudice can seep into even our most beloved stories? The crows are both a symbol of encouragement and a stain of history, forever caught between sympathy and stereotype. Speedy Gonzalez. Looney Tunes, 1950s to 1960s. For decades, Speedy Gonzalez was known as the fastest mouse in all Mexico. With his oversized sombrero, squeaky accent, and lightning-fast legs, he became a fan favorite in the Looney Tunes lineup. Children adored his clever tricks against cats, while Mexican audiences celebrated him as a folk hero of resilience. But by the 1990s, Speedy disappeared from American television. The problem wasn't Speedy's antics, it was the stereotypes surrounding him. Critics argued that his exaggerated accent, sleepy, slow-moving cousins, and tequila-laced humor reinforced offensive cliches about Mexican culture. Cartoon Network, which owned rerun rights, pulled him from broadcast entirely in 1999. Overnight, a once-beloved character was shelved, treated as an outdated relic. But here's the twist. While American executives worried about offense, Speedy remained wildly popular in Mexico. Viewers there didn't see him as a slur, but as a rare, empowering hero, clever, unstoppable, and proudly Mexican. A backlash campaign began, with Mexican-American groups demanding his reinstatement. They saw his absence not as progress, but as erasure of one of the few cultural icons who outwitted his enemies. By the mid-2000s, Speedy slowly returned, appearing in new cartoons and even getting voiceovers by Mexican comedian Gabriel Iglesias in the Space Jam sequel. Yet his legacy remains tangled. Was he harmful or heroic, stereotypical or celebratory? Censored. 11. Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, 1930s to 1940s. Few groups of characters illustrate the dark side of animation better than the Censored 11. These were 11 Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies shorts permanently pulled from circulation in 1968 for their shocking racial stereotypes. Featuring characters like lazy black caricatures, cannibalistic Africans, and exaggerated Asian figures, these shorts weren't just offensive, they were outright propaganda wrapped in slapstick. At the time of their release in the 1930s and 1940s, they were played to laughter in theaters nationwide. No one questioned the humor. It reflected the racist attitudes baked into Hollywood itself. But by the late 1960s, with civil rights at the forefront, Warner Brothers decided the shorts were too toxic for TV. They were locked in a vault, never to be broadcast again. The characters from these shorts became animation's forbidden fruit. Collectors traded bootleg copies, historians studied them in secret, and fans whispered about the lost cartoons that studios didn't want anyone to see. Unlike Speedy Gonzalez or Mammy Two Shoes, who were edited or altered, the Censored 11 were completely banned. The dilemma is haunting. Do we hide such material forever or expose it as a teaching tool about the prejudices of the past? Today, most fans know the Censored 11 only by reputation, rarely by sight. These characters weren't just forgotten, they were deliberately buried. And perhaps that silence speaks louder than the laughter ever did. Uncle Remus, Song of the South, 1946. In 1946, Disney released Song of the South, a blend of live action and animation that gave the world zip-a-dee-doo-dah. At its center was Uncle Remus, a kindly black storyteller who recounted tales of Br'er Rabbit and his adventures. On the surface, Uncle Remus was warm, wise, and fatherly. But the film and his character became one of Disney's most controversial creations. The problem was context. Set in the Reconstruction-era South, Song of the South portrayed Uncle Remus as happily working on a plantation, content in his role and deferential to white characters. To critics, this wasn't harmless nostalgia. It was a romanticized distortion of America's history of slavery and racism. By the 1970s and 1980s, pressure mounted. Disney stopped re-releasing the film, and Uncle Remus faded into obscurity. While the animated characters like Br'er Rabbit lived on in theme park rides, Remus himself became too radioactive to appear anywhere. Disney executives have repeatedly said Song of the South will never be released on Disney+, sealing Remus's fate as one of the most banned figures in animation history. For some, Uncle Remus represented kindness and the preservation of African folklore. For others, he was a painful stereotype, a whitewashed fantasy of the plantation South. His erasure leaves behind one of Disney's deepest scars, a character locked in a vault not because of who he was, but because of the world he represented. Inky the Minstrel Cat. Looney Tunes, 1930s to 1940s. In the golden age of Warner Bros. Cartoons, characters like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck became legends. But buried in the vaults is another figure, Inky, a small black boy, and later a black cat-like caricature whose design leaned heavily on minstrel imagery. He starred in several cartoons during the late 1930s and early 1940s, often paired with a giant dopey bird called the Mynah bird. On the surface, these shorts were harmless slapstick. Inky chased the bird, chaos unfolded, and audiences laughed. But the character himself, with his jet-black skin, oversized lips, and lazy dialect, was rooted in demeaning racial stereotypes that had long been staples of vaudeville and blackface entertainment. For audiences of the era, this was normal comedy. For later generations, it was shocking. By the 1960s, when Warner Brothers syndicated their cartoons for television, Inky was quietly removed. Unlike Bugs or Porky, who lived on through endless reruns, Inky vanished almost overnight. His legacy became tied to the broader controversy of the Censored 11, though his shorts weren't always included in that list. Collectors sought out grainy prints, but for the general public, Inky became an erased chapter in Looney Tunes history. The tragedy of Inky is that he was never allowed to exist as anything more than a stereotype. Bosko, or Warner Brothers, 1930s. Before Bugs Bunny, before Daffy Duck, there was Bosko. Created in 1929 by Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising, Bosko was the first recurring star of Warner Bros. Cartoons. He sang, he danced, he cracked jokes, and he was designed in the style of a minstrel character. His round black face, white gloves, and wide grin mirrored blackface imagery that was popular in vaudeville at the time. Initially, Bosko was marketed as a Negro boy character, though Warner Brothers later tried to downplay this by calling him a little inkblot. In the 1930s, audiences embraced him. He was cheerful, lively, and a perfect vehicle for the new world of synchronized sound animation. But as time went on, Bosko's racial undertones became harder to ignore. By the 1940s, he was phased out. Later, in the 1990s, Warner Brothers briefly revived Bosko in Tiny Toon Adventures, reimagining him as a human child in an attempt to wash away the controversy. But the shadow of his minstrel roots never disappeared. Bosko was the foundation on which Warner Brothers built its empire, yet he is now almost never mentioned in the same breath as the characters who followed. His banning reflects a broader truth. Animation studios often built their legacies on stereotypes, only to bury those roots once cultural values shifted. Bosko is forgotten not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well at embodying imagery that modern audiences rightly reject. His silence in the canon is both deliberate and deserved. Coal Black and Deceven Dwarfs, 1943. Few banned cartoons are as infamous as Coal Black and Deceven Dwarfs, a Merry Melodies short directed by Bob Clampett. On its surface, it was meant as a jazzy, all-black parody of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film featured swing music, fast-paced gags, and dazzling animation. But its characters were grotesque caricatures of African Americans, drawn with exaggerated features and voiced with mocking dialects. At the time of its release, some praised it as energetic and entertaining. Clampett himself claimed he made the film as a tribute to black performers he admired. But the reality was that Coal Black trafficked in every racist trope of its era, reducing its characters to buffoons. By 1968, Warner Brothers banned it entirely, placing it among the Censored 11. It has never been officially re-released, though animation historians and collectors keep it alive in underground circles. To some, it's one of the most technically impressive cartoons of the 1940s, brimming with Clampett's signature energy. To others, it's one of the ugliest examples of how racism was normalized through art. The banning of Coal Black illustrates the double-edged nature of animation history. It's a masterpiece of craft and a disaster of representation, preserved only as a warning. Forgotten by the mainstream, it lingers as one of the most infamous ghosts of American animation, a story too painful to celebrate, but too important to erase. The Blackface Elmer Fudd, early Looney Tunes, 1940s. Elmer Fudd is remembered as a bumbling hunter, forever outwitted by Bugs Bunny. But in the early 1940s, animators experimented with putting him in blackface, transforming him into a crude racial caricature for comedic effect. In these shorts, Elmer's speech impediment was exaggerated further, his skin darkened, and his role reduced to a walking minstrel gag. At the time, Hollywood frequently used blackface in live-action films, so animators thought nothing of translating it to the cartoon world. The result was a grotesque distortion of one of Warner Brothers' most recognizable characters. In some cases, Elmer even broke into mock jive or donned exaggerated costumes that reinforced stereotypes of African American culture. By the 1960s, these cartoons were deemed too offensive for television syndication. The blackface versions of Elmer disappeared, scrubbed from rerun packages, and replaced with his standard hunting misadventures. For many modern fans, it's shocking to learn that such cartoons even existed. The banning of these portrayals highlights how even beloved characters were not immune to the prejudices of their era. Tintin in the Congo, animated adaptations, 1960s. Though not born in Hollywood, Tintin was beloved worldwide as a comic hero. In the 1960s, several of Hergé's works were adapted into animated films and television episodes. But one adventure was quickly banned from rotation, Tintin in the Congo. The story, originally published in 1931, followed the young reporter's exploits in Africa. Its depictions of African characters were deeply racist, portraying them as childlike, simple-minded, and subservient to European colonizers. When adapted into animated form, the controversy exploded. Critics condemned its portrayal of colonialism as nostalgic rather than critical. Entire scenes showed Tintin teaching the Congolese people basic arithmetic or hunting animals with no sense of moral consequence. By the 1970s, broadcasters refused to air it, and in many countries the cartoon disappeared completely. Hergé himself later admitted embarrassment over the story, blaming the attitudes of his youth. But the damage was done. The animated versions of Tintin in the Congo became lost relics, rarely shown even in retrospectives of the beloved franchise. While other Tintin adventures still air proudly, this one remains locked away, a stain on an otherwise cherished legacy. The banning of Tintin in the Congo reminds us that even globally adored heroes carry baggage. When celebrated icons are built on colonial fantasies, their stories must either be re-examined or abandoned entirely. In Tintin's case, the world chose erasure. Mr. Popo, Dragon Ball Z, 1980s to 1990s. In the world of Dragon Ball Z, filled with aliens, cyborgs, and gods, one character stood out, not for his power, but for his controversy. Mr. Popo, the genie-like attendant of Kami, appeared throughout the series as a loyal helper. With his jet-black skin, round eyes, and oversized red lips, his design echoed minstrel caricatures that Western audiences immediately found offensive. In Japan, where the series originated, Mr. Popo wasn't initially seen as problematic. He was viewed as a magical figure tied to ancient myths and traditions. But when Dragon Ball Z aired internationally in the late 1980s and 1990s, the backlash grew. American audiences, in particular, criticized his design as a racist holdover from blackface imagery. By the early 2000s, networks scrambled to address the issue. When Dragon Ball Z Kai was released, Mr. Popo's skin was recolored bright blue for U.S. audiences. The change was jarring, but it was deemed necessary to prevent outrage. In some regions, his appearances were minimized or cut entirely. Today, Mr. Popo remains a divisive figure. Some fans argue he's harmless, pointing out his wisdom and loyalty. Others insist his very design is rooted in racial caricature. His banning, recoloring, and censorship reveal how even global franchises stumble when old stereotypes bleed into modern audiences. Forgotten by some, ridiculed by others, Mr. Popo is a reminder that cultural blind spots can haunt even the most beloved stories. Jinx, Pokémon, 1990s. Pokémon was a global phenomenon, bringing colorful monsters into homes around the world. But one creature, Jinx, became the subject of intense controversy. Designed with black skin, exaggerated lips, and flowing blonde hair, Jinx's appearance bore an uncomfortable resemblance to blackface caricatures. In the late 1990s, as the franchise exploded in the West, activists and critics raised alarms. Jinx wasn't just a monster, it looked like a harmful stereotype. Articles and television segments condemned the design, and the backlash quickly reached Nintendo and Game Freak. By the early 2000s, Jinx underwent a quiet transformation. Her skin color was changed from black to purple in video games, trading cards, and animated episodes. Older episodes featuring her original design were edited or banned from circulation. In some countries, Jinx was pulled from television entirely. What makes Jinx fascinating is how her story intersects with cultural sensitivity and corporate response. Unlike characters from the 1940s, Jinx wasn't erased outright. She was redesigned, sanitized, and allowed to continue existing in a new form. Yet the original image still lingers in fan discussions, screenshots, and old VHS tapes. Her banning and redesign show how even seemingly innocent children's media can echo long histories of racism. Jinx's purple face may live on, but her original design remains a shadow, an uncomfortable reminder that stereotypes can sneak into modern creations just as easily as they did in the past. The Siamese Cats, Lady and the Tramp, 1955. Disney's Lady and the Tramp gave the world one of the most romantic spaghetti dinners in cinema history. But tucked inside its story were two characters that left a very different legacy: the Siamese cats, C and Am. With their slanted eyes, buck teeth, and exaggerated accents, they embodied crude Asian stereotypes. In the 1950s, these cats were played for laughs with a mischievous song, "We Are Siamese, If You Please," that showcased their scheming antics. They were exotic, sneaky, and untrustworthy, a harmful reflection of how Hollywood often portrayed Asian characters during the Cold War era. For decades, audiences sang along without questioning the implications. But as conversations about representation evolved, the Siamese cats became infamous. Disney quietly acknowledged the problem in the 21st century. When The Lady and the Tramp live-action remake was released in 2019, the cats were reimagined with new designs, new voices, and a completely different song. The original C and Am were left behind, condemned to the vault of history. For some, their removal feels like Disney rewriting its past. For others, it's a necessary step toward ensuring new generations don't inherit outdated stereotypes. Today, the Siamese cats live on only in memory, both catchy and cruel, a reminder of how easily prejudice can sneak into art that claims to be timeless. From forgotten centaurs to censored Pokémon, these banned cartoon characters reveal a hidden history of prejudice, controversy, and cultural change. They remind us that laughter is never innocent. It reflects the world that creates it. Which of these characters shocked you most? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.